So a lot happens this episode, but what I will say, something that I want to see much more of is Jet Reno and Raynor becoming besties, because that just might actually be the best thing I've ever seen in Star Trek. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to my review of the 4th episode of Star Trek Discovery's 5th and final season. This episode titled Face the Strange. Ooh, I always love when strange is in the title, always means I'm in for a good time. But before I get into that, as per usual, I will stay spoiler-free up front for most of the episode, and then in just a little bit, with a warning, I will get into spoilers in the back half. That being said, before I get into my spoiler-free section, I will have to talk a little bit about the concept of this episode that does get revealed right before the opening titles of the episode. So if you want no spoilers, please jump off here, because to just be able to talk about anything in the spoiler-free section, I'm going to need to say at least what the concept of this is. I won't spoil how the episode goes, but that is your big warning here. Alright, staying mostly spoiler-free here, I really loved this episode because it falls into one of my favorite type of Star Trek episodes, and that is the time travel episode. A lot of people get sick of Star Trek overusing the time travel trope, but for me, it never gets old for me. I always enjoy a time travel episode, sue me. And this one actually feels particularly interesting, especially because this is Star Trek Discovery's final season, as this episode takes us through different moments in Star Trek Discovery's past. In fact, this episode mainly reminds me of a 7th season episode from Star Trek Voyager called Shattered, where in that episode, the Voyager got split up into different time zones at different parts of the ships, allowing Chakotay to go to different sections and encounter different villains and moments from the entire series up to that point. And in a large way, because at the time that they filmed that episode, Star Trek Voyager knew that it was coming to an end that season, it very much felt like a celebration of everything that had gone on in Voyager, and actually allowed them to bring in some fun little cameos and references from the past of the series. And actually, I kind of feel like Shattered is a kind of better celebration and finale, at least in a spiritual sense, to Voyager than even Endgame ended up being. And that feels rather fitting, considering that this is also Star Trek Discovery's final season, and we get to jump to different moments throughout Discovery's history in this episode as well. But that being said, I will say you can also tell that they weren't aware at the time of filming this episode that it was going to be Discovery's final season, because in my mind, they didn't take full advantage of the opportunity to, do a celebration of Discovery's entire history. But in a large way, I actually think that benefits this episode, because rather than going into gratuitous sort of like, oh, look at this big moment from the past, it stays more laser focused on the character beats that this episode wants to do. And I found that to be much more fascinating and interesting, while still at least evoking that sense of like, look at how far we've come. And as a way, it allows this episode to kind of ride that line between nostalgia and actually telling a pertinent story at hand. That being said, there is a part of me that is a little sad that we didn't get, this character popping up or this moment on screen as sort of like a nice little nostalgia play for Discovery's 5 seasons. So I will say there was a part of me that wanted that, and perhaps if they knew that this was the final season going into this episode, they would have done that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Star Trek has had enough nostalgia plays that I'm happier this way than if they had gone further the other way. That being said, this episode isn't devoid of gratuity, because there is a couple gratuitous fight sequences, one in particular that I found to kind of distract from the more interesting character beats that could have happened instead of an action sequence, that I found to be rather disappointing, and honestly just an ongoing critique with Star Trek Discovery this entire season so far, and honestly throughout its entire run. That being said, I did love that this episode gave us a greater look at the character of Raynor, who I think is just becoming slowly one of my favorite characters on Discovery, despite him only being introduced 4 episodes ago. He's kind of landing in that same area as Shaw for me, as many Trekkies have pointed out that he's kind of a very similar character from Star Trek Picard Season 3, in that he's just this gruff, assholeless character who you ultimately do see moments of yeah, he actually is a good guy and he's getting there. And for me, actually, and maybe this is too early to tell, I kind of like him better than Shaw. No shade at Todd Stashwick. He was absolutely one of my favorite things of Star Trek Picard Season 3, which is, to be fair, not saying a ton because I'm not the biggest fan of Star Trek Picard Season 3, but he was a fantastic part of it. So saying that I like Raynor potentially even more, I think just speaks to how well this character is being portrayed and written, in that he's just riding that line between being an asshole, you're like, what the fuck, man, and then the episode taking time to not only ingratiate us with him and have us see the humanity behind him at certain moments and see that, there's a reason that he feels this way, while also using the storyline to really hone in on showing him grow from the places where we did see him being an asshole. On top of that, this episode is another great showcase for Sonequa Martin Green, who kills it in this episode. I think her range in this is absolutely fantastic, and you can really see how she's grown as a character and as an actor on this show over its 5 seasons. And finally, it's also worth saying that this episode does remind me a little bit of the Season 1 Star Trek Discovery episode, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, which was also a time travel sort of episode, and actually even pulls directly from that episode for other characters like Stamets and their situation within this episode, that I also felt was like a fun little nod to Star Trek Discovery's entire history, going all the way back to the first season. So ultimately, while I did find a couple things to be gratuitous in this episode, as well as, just a little bit of disappointment at some of the things that they could have done with this concept, given that this is the final season, but didn't take full advantage of, overall, I thought this was fantastic, and I really adored this one. I'm going to have to get into spoilers from here, so if you have not seen the episode yet, get stuck in your own time loop, jump back to the beginning of this video, still give me the watch time, and just watch it over and over and over and over again, because that would be great for me. Anyways, let's get into spoilers. So actually, there's just really one plot this episode, so I'm just going to go through it instead of breaking it up like I sometimes do in my spoiler-free section. We start off the episode with Maul and Lock, and I'm really glad that we're getting these quick little scenes with these two. I love them sort of getting one over on this smuggler guy that they were buying the time bug from. I thought that was really great, and I also really like to see that Maul is certainly the much more gung-ho of the two of them, and Lock is kind of reserved and more worried and more pragmatic of the two, and yet Maul is able to inspire him to be like, let's be free, let's get through this. I really do hope we get an episode or more scenes and storylines with these two, because while I do really like them and think they're being portrayed really, really, really well, they still feel a little bit stereotypical in terms of how these characters go, and it's like, oh yeah, I got a chip on my shoulder, and yet we're fighting for freedom, like very Bonnie and Clyde-esque, but I want a little bit more nuance with them that I think can definitely come out from them, but we're not getting as much of just yet. But I am liking these little snippets that we have. We then see the little time bug that Maul placed onto Adira last episode jump onto the ship. We also get a nice little scene between Adira and Gray, and I will say I did like that we're getting at least a little continuing up on their relationship from last episode, especially given that it's showing that they're still friendly even despite the fact that they've broken up. So I really hope we get more of that relationship, because it is just something that feels very ancillary and sort of forgotten about throughout most of Discovery to this point. That being said, we see the spider jumping around the ship, and we go up to the bridge where Burnham and Rayner are talking to their crew about potentially where to look for the next step on their journey, looking for the progenitor tech. And I really liked this scene where Rayner basically shut down Bryce by saying, look, we gotta focus on the mission, I don't need to hear any of your collaborative speculation, like my word goes. And Burnham then taking him aside and saying, like, no, that's not how we handle things here. And again, given that this episode is a time loop episode, this feels like it's very much setting up a contrast between where Rayner is as a person and where Burnham herself was way back at the beginning of Star Trek Discovery, way back in Season 1. She even herself brings up her mutiny and that she has grown since that time where she didn't really want to reach out to the other people. She wasn't being collaborative. She took everything upon herself and sort of had this like hero complex that we saw throughout Season 1 and even into Season 2 a little bit, that she had to break down to be able to connect more with her team, and Rayner needing to be someone who does that as well, and that being drawn out throughout this episode as we get through into the time loop bubble stuff later on. So I love that as a setup, as a way to draw that parallel between Burnham herself's character arc and where Rayner is, and perhaps what Burnham sees in Rayner. I also really like that Burnham acknowledges the burn in terms of what Rayner himself has had lived through, which again isn't directly calling it out, but relates to what Burnham went through during the Klingon War. Rayner himself, like Burnham did during the Klingon War, had to live through an era where everyone was seen as an enemy, it was much harder to collaborate with people, and just stuff was generally more dangerous. So again, I liked that parallel between the two of them and their histories, despite it being not exactly like called out and said like, look, your experience in the burn was very much like my time during the Klingon War. We then get into the actual plot of the episode because a time bubble starts because of the little time bug thing down in engineering that Stamets also sees, and we jump back in time to when Discovery was going through the time jump with the Red Angel. Thought that this was such a great reveal, really, really fun, but what I liked most about it was how instantaneously Burnham and Rayner jumped into being collaborative and working together. And I really love just this showing, not necessarily telling, with Rayner's character that while he is an asshole at times, when the chips are down, he is ready and willing to not only listen to Burnham, but be able to work along with her to figure out what they need to do next. And just, they're back and forth, and they're just pragmatic, like, let's focus on this situation, let's get things done, was fan-frickin-tastic. And it just speaks well to both the writing as well as Rayner as a character. I really just adored this. I also love them also trying to figure out what's going on, like, is this a psychedelic thing that someone's manipulating our minds, something like that, but ultimately figuring out that it is the time bug, something that was left over from the temporal war, which I love the Star Trek Enterprise references there, but also was made by the Krenim, which is itself a Star Trek Voyager reference to the time manipulating aliens that we saw from Year of Hell, and I believe season 4 or 5 of Voyager, one of the best two-parters in that series. Of course the Krenim would have been involved in the Time War, like, of course they would have. I also love this idea that it creates a localized time bubble that they keep jumping through, but around them, time just keeps moving forward at a normal pace. Again, it reminds me of the episode Cause and Effect, way back in The Next Generation, which was also kind of loosely referenced by the Season 1 Discovery episode, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, in that, like, the Enterprise was stuck in a time loop bubble there with Starfleet Captain Fraser as well, but it was also a localized event, so time went on around them outside of this event. So I thought that was like a cool little like connection there.
See if we can find out how long we've been in this causality loop.
Time base confirms our chronometers are off by 17.4 days.
I also love that Burnham, again from the episode Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, knows that Stamets would be unaffected by the time bubble because of his tardigrade DNA. And then we jump down to poor Stamets getting healed during the Battle of Control and being like, oh god, I forgot how much this hurts. That was very, very funny. I did kind of enjoy that. Poor guy. We also learn that the jumps are getting exponentially longer each and every time, which is something that'll come up later to help Stamets be able to fix the problem. But then we also then jump into 30 years into the future, and we get to see that not only is Discovery abandoned, but the Federation headquarters has been destroyed by the Breen, who got a hold of the progenitor technology, which I really love because it set the stakes for the rest of the season. It shows us what could happen. So this was a nice use of the time jump technology because it has been rather nebulous what the danger of the progenitor tech actually could be. Like, we have ideas like, yes, it's very powerful, yes, we need to get it, could create life, could do a lot of harm, but by showing us this in this episode, now we have like, yes, this stuff could get destroyed. It does mean, however, that we have yet again the whole Federation could be destroyed level stakes of a season, which, frankly, like I said, I knew it was probably going to come. Every season of Discovery has had that, and we've also set up progenitor tech as being like this big, technology that could be very dangerous. So, like, it had to happen given the setup, but it's still one of those, like, yet another season of Federation / universe / all life in the galaxy ending style stakes, which is a little bit frustrating. I would have liked a lower key sort of like, we just need to get this tech to stop, one thing or one person or whatever, just a lower stakes situation. But I know I was kind of like hoping against the tide there for that one, but there you go. That also being said, though, this jump to 30 years into the future and Zora sort of being out of it and we hearing music playing when they come out into the bridge of this reminded me very much of the short trek Calypso, which we still have not yet gotten an answer to where it is in the Discovery timeline. So I am very curious if this little jump in the future that we got to see here is perhaps going to come back up and give us a greater and more direct explanation for Calypso and where it is at some point, or potentially if this is all we're going to get for a Calypso acknowledgement, that maybe Calypso takes place in the sort of alternate timeline here that was created during this time bubble. I don't know. I hope we get more than just that. But if that is the explanation that we do get, I guess it could theoretically work on some level. But we will have to wait and see if that ultimately is going to be the case. Because I have been waiting for, 3 seasons now to learn what the hell was the context for Calypso. I love Calypso. It was one of the best short treks that we got. But we'll have to see. We then get a really fun scene where Stamets, now back from being dead in the future, which was I wonder if he was aware of that. That's weirdly existential horror shit going on there. Anyways, he has a scene with Reno where he postulates, what if I was kind of stuck in a time loop? And Reno goes, are you in a time loop right now? And I really thought that she had him. I honestly almost would have preferred it if she was in on it and sort of was like, oh, well, I guess he's in a time loop. I'll just play pretend right now and just ignore that it happened so I don't change the future. But they do play it that Reno thought he was just joking. So I thought that was a funny bit that would have been interesting to play with. We then have Stamets meeting up with Rayner and Burnham, and I love Stamets kicking everyone out, saying oh, look, there'll be a mushroom breach, which later on he mentions, I'm kind of concerned that my crew doesn't know that that's not a thing, which I also thought was very, very funny. Love the comedy in this episode. The one-handed, offhanded lines here are just fantastic. But they decide to meet on Deck 13 in every time loop in order to plan what they're going to do next. I will say, once they do meet on Deck 13, apparently that's the deck where all the lights are flickering. We've seen this deck a few times on Discovery, apparently, where, whenever we just see a deck that just has flickering lights for whatever reason, it turns out that it's I guess it's Deck 13. So the unlucky deck, what can I tell you? They need to fix the lights. No one can figure it out. I guess it's haunted. Ooh, that would be a fun episode. I also have to say this sequence where it talked about have to play with relativity and be able to do all the stuff to be able to break the defense mechanism. I was sitting there thinking, Dr. Aaron helped write this. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Aaron McDonald, who may be watching this, by the way, hello, love you, mwah, is a friend of mine and the producer of my movie Identities, and she just loves talking about scientific stuff. I adore her so much, and so every time I hear scientific stuff come up in Star Trek nowadays, I'm like, Dr. Aaron had something to do with this. I see you, Dr. Aaron, with your little technological stuff, being all smart and shit. I see you. Anyways, Dr. Aaron's great. I just thought that was very funny. Anyways, they end up needing some holographic, technobabbly type of stuff, so Burnham goes to her quarters where she runs into Book, and again, we get a quick little moment where we see how far Book and Burnham have kind of split apart this season, because they used to be much closer. Also, David Ajala just looking damn fine without his shirt. I'm just saying, not trying to sexualize the man. He looks very good. He looks very good. What do you want from me? Then our 3 time-traveling crew members go to try and stop the time bug, but it does have a defense mechanism that can apparently turn you into dust, kind of like the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade guy, so don't want to touch that. So they then come up with a plan to be able to go to warp, break the time bubble, and that'll be able to help them be able to stop this defense mechanism on the time bug. We learn that the ship at this time is in Lorca's time period, and they need to be able to try to change this time bug right now, not only to save time, but also if they do something in this timeline and it jumps to the next one, then it sort of solidifies and actually happens, as opposed to if they do it before then, it doesn't actually happen in the timeline. It sort of gets reset. So they have one chance to do this, which I thought was a good way to sort of up the stakes a little bit. But then Burnham goes up to the bridge and encounters not only Linus in an adorable little scene, but herself from season 1. And I really, really loved this scene up until a certain point. And that is because we see season 1 Burnham being incredibly distrustful of present Burnham, specifically because she's a captain, and season 1 Burnham not believing that she has the right to be there or that she can trust anyone around her. And I love that. And not only that, I love the difference in performance that Sonequa Martin Green does here. Having just rewatched season 1 for my retro reviews of Discovery, I can certainly see the change in just how she holds herself as the character of Burnham between these two juxtaposing versions of her over the 5 seasons, and it feels very true for season 1 Burnham versus season 5, and it's just so amazing Sonequa Martin Green can just jump back into that character and still make her feel cohesive. That being said, though, while I did love that scene up to the point, it does sort of lead to this extended fight sequence between the two of them, which, like, I get it, we want to have a fight sequence, but it just felt very gratuitous and very weird and over the top and very like, oh, look, I'm using, kung fu action-y stuff. I just felt like it was very unneeded and unnecessary, and I felt you could have even had, like, a much longer conversation between the two that I would have found to be much more interesting. So, alas, I don't really love that as much. That's sort of my one big critique of the episode is that sequence, but what are you going to do? We do move on, and Season 1 Burnham is actually used to another great effect later on. Also, during the sequence when Burnham's talking to her passed out self, she does use the phrase, it's going to be a long road. And I'm like, oh, is she going to say it? Is she going to say getting from there to here? She doesn't. It's just a little odd-long reference to the Star Trek Enterprise theme song, but I was very excited. I was like, is she going to say that? Is she going to say the thing? Is she going to do it? But alas, that would have been too on the nose. Do it, you Star Trek Discovery writers, you cowards, do it! It's been a long road. That also being said, I'll mention this here when I heard that we were on Lorca's version of the ship, and I'm like, oh, this is the final season. Are we going to get a cameo from Jason Isaacs or potentially even Anson Mount? I mean, Jason Isaacs might be harder, but Anson Mount, like, he's literally in Strange New Worlds filming in the same place that Discovery is, so maybe he just hopped on over to Discovery set to be able to film a little cameo, but apparently that is not the case. Again, I chalk that up to potentially them not knowing that this was going to be the final season for Discovery. Otherwise, I assume they may have actually tried to bring in one of those two actors to be able to do this. That being said, we do get a fun cameo with the character of Ariam. I didn't actually check, so please someone in the comments let me know, but I don't know which actress is actually playing Ariam here, because there were two actresses that played Ariam. There was one that played her in Season 1 and one that played her in Season 2. The actress that played her in Season 2 left the show after the character died, but the actress who played Ariam in Season 1 has actually been on the show still as a human character. So I'm actually kind of curious which actress was playing her. I didn't actually get to catch that, so apologies. It's hard for me to look because I'm watching screeners of this a few week or so before it actually airs, so it's hard for me to like double check that. So let me know in the comments which Ariam it was. But either way, it's nice to see the character back, and we see how the crew of Discovery at this time distrust Burnham because she's still seen as a mutineer. And again, Burnham like showing that she knows them and actually has come to get to know them as people, kind of contrasting with Raynor at the beginning of the episode as well, and also showcasing how Raynor at the beginning of the episode is very similar to how Burnham was in Season 1. And Burnham taking the time to get to know people and saying like, look, I know you very well, and even proving to Ariam like, I know how you die, and I know that that's something you would do, and that's something I know about you. And Ariam saying, yeah, I would. I thought that was a really powerful sequence. We also have down in engineering, Raynor and Stamets having an argument, with Stamets calling out Raynor not being willing to work with people, and Raynor actually listening to Stamets, saying, yeah, you're right, I do need to be collaborative. Tell me what I need to do right now, here in this moment. I thought that was great. Again, it goes to just how I really love Raynor's characterization, where he is an asshole, but he is willing to listen and be proven wrong and be humble, which is partially why I really like him better than Shaw, because while I did really love Todd Stashwick and his performance as Shaw, one criticism that I have with the character is that, spoiler for Picard Season 3 a little bit here, he kind of stays a gruff asshole the entire season, and he does have a moment where he dies and does finally acknowledge Seven of Nine as Seven of Nine, and sort of has that sort of redeeming moment in death. But then we also learn afterwards that, oh, actually, he was going to recommend Seven of Nine for captain. He was a good guy the entire time, and it kind of undoes the like arc that he has throughout the season, in that he kind of learns to get over some of his prejudices and bigotries towards someone like Seven of Nine, even while we understand where his bigotries come from. It kind of weakened the character, I think, a little bit in that moment. For me, that's my opinion. Whereas Raynor, we are actually getting to see moment by moment him starting to grow and change. And while we got a little bit of that with Shaw, I think Raynor, at least these 2 or 3 episodes that we've really gotten to see him grow so far, I think has done a better job of like giving us better goalposts and movements within episodes than we got with Shaw. Again, saying that as having someone who really liked Shaw in Picard Season 3. We also have Bryce and Season 1 Burnham confronting Raynor and Stamets, trying to stop them, and Raynor actually being able to talk them down. Bryce, because he actually listened to Bryce saying he loved ships last episode, being able to prove that, so I like that kind of came back around, showed that he was actually listening, and while he was not actually caring for the crew in the moment and making a connection, he did actually listen. So I did like that he used that to actually make a connection here in the past, but also does the same with Burnham, and showcases that he sees himself in Burnham by saying, like, you believe that you don't you don't belong here, you haven't earned to be here, but yes, you have, and keep fighting, you will get there, and you will become a captain. Just know that. And I thought that was a powerful message for Burnham the character, for Raynor the character, and for us too, to say that, like, yes, you can work to redeem yourself if you've done something wrong. You may have to earn it, but you can do it. You're not just this horrible person that, fascism, as we saw in season 1 of Discovery, tries to make it seem. Like, if you do something irredeemable, you can't change, you can't grow, so might as well just become, a fascist. Might as well just give yourself to the machine. But instead, you can actually work to grow, and that's how we form the Star Trek future, by knowing that we're going to fail, but taking the time to actually try to grow and become better people, even in our failures, which I thought was wonderful. And this, by the way, I'm just going to say this really quickly here, is why I love Discovery so much and why I'm going to miss it. I do love, like, Strange New Worlds, and I'm sure I'm going to love all the Star Trek shows that come after, but it's like these little nuances in Discovery that I think really makes it stand out as a Star Trek show that really gets, like, the emotional aspect of the human experience, and I think makes it a very powerful Star Trek, that it just understands these nuances of, how things like fascism form. Fascism is quite literally about, trying to say, we're all horrible people inside, so give yourself to the machine. But Star Trek and the Federation and Starfleet really should be about, as Data says in Star Trek The Next Generation, understanding that we must strive to be more than we are. Sometimes we will fail to reach our ultimate goal, but it's the effort that yields its own rewards. That's the quote that always sticks with me from Star Trek. And so I think Discovery, more than any other Star Trek, especially on TV or streaming right now, but even throughout all of Star Trek, I think understands this most, and it's why I really love it. But ultimately, this does allow them to be able to break the time bug. I love Stamets saying, I wish I could have crushed you, it would have been more satisfying. But ultimately, them able to escape, and Raynor learning his lesson and complimenting Bryce, saying, yes, it was a good idea that Maul and Lock were trying to use us to get ahead, which we see that they did while they were stuck in the time bubble. And we go off into next episode, hopefully with them learning where they need to go next. So that is this episode of Star Trek Discovery. I really loved it. I especially loved the last little moments there with Raynor and Burnham, where Raynor acknowledges that, like, yes, I did get through this by collaborating with people, by connecting with people. You are absolutely right, and that is something that I need to learn to do going forward. So loved that. Again, I love Star Trek Discovery. I love the nuances that it brings, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know down below what you think about this episode of Star Trek Discovery. With all that being said, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.